Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future of Healing 3 days of workshops. My name is Ryan Hassan. For those that don't know, I'm the co-founder of the Centre for Healing and also the co-creator and trainer of the modality embodied processing. I'm joined today all the way from the UK at 1 a.m. Mr. Ben Tannahill. Ben is a senior practitioner of our modality embodied processing. He's a somatic therapist and just an amazing human being. And I'm very, very glad to have you on the call today, Ben. So welcome.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ryan.
So we have over the next 3 days, three classes, what we consider to be the lead dominoes on the healing journey after doing this work for a decade. The first one today, we're going to be talking about shame. Ben is going to be running a class on actually just turning towards and feeling our emotions as opposed to turning away. Myself and Matt are going to be back on Friday to talk about integrating suppressed anger, which is another very, very juicy topic. Today, we are talking about shame, exploring shame, deconstructing shame. There's going to be education, obviously, around the emotion and the state of shame. There's also going to be some practical steps and things that you can do if you are inquiring into your own shame, or if you are a practitioner in the space. There might be some things here that you can bring into sessions to be able to help with the results of your clients and help them better explore shame as well. I will make a caveat that, if you are exploring this on your own, then be very, very wary if things get too intense, if they get too overwhelming or anything like that. Please stop and reach out to a practitioner, get some help, get some resources on your side, because whenever we're doing this type of inner work, it can be a deep exploration and we don't really know, how intense that's going to get. So make sure if it starts going that way, reach out to someone. You can find practitioners through the Centre for Healing. If you head to our website, you can connect with one of our trained practitioners there, and they can be a guide and help you work through what you're going through. So I have some slides that I'm going to share, and we're going to probably spend the majority of today's talk going through. So feel free to take notes, take screenshots of the slides. I'll try and keep up with the chat box, but it might be a little bit hard when I'm sharing my screen, but I will try and get to any questions as well that you have along the way. Before we jump into the slides, it's probably worth talking about the importance. Like, why is it so important to look at our shame on our healing path? So, Ben, do you have a sort of a definition or how the way you see shame when you've worked with it, both in yourself and with clients?
Yeah, sure. So, shame, in my view, it's the actual mechanism of shame, of why it exists within you, is to almost fragment you internally. Any parts of you that might be a threat interpersonally, with your family or teachers or whoever's around you, are sort of fragmented off and inhibited. So, shame inhibits your self-expression in order to keep you safe, essentially. And this could be in emotions like anger or fear. So if they're going to be threatening to allow, shame is what you use to fragment those parts off and keep them unconscious, keep them repressed. But it's not just anger and fear. It could also be positive, affects. Like it could be your joy, your happiness. It could be your behaviors. So it could be, singing or dancing. It could be some desires or opinions. Shame, why it's so important is because it can attach to any aspect of yourself, like any emotion or behavior or pattern. And this is also why it's so important, because shame can sort of gum up the works of the healing journey in a way that other emotion, just like nothing else really, because it attaches itself to everything, and the way it keeps you safe is by sort of making you withdraw, inhibit yourself, stay back. And to go into the healing journey, you need to start engaging with parts of yourself. But the shame is hiding all those parts of yourself, even your shame, because you can be ashamed of your shame or afraid of your shame. So it likes to hide. This is the thing about shame. It really likes to hide. It likes to hide other parts of you, and that's why it's uh, makes it difficult to start working on the healing journey. But if you can just start to get a little bit of traction with shame, it starts to open up your world in quite a beautiful way. Suddenly you have access, even just a little bit, to more parts of yourself, more of your emotions, or more of your desires, more of your positive affects, and more behaviors, expressions. These kinds of things start to come to the surface more, either to be lived in an authentic way or to be inquired or examined with a modality, like EP or whatever else you're using.
Yeah, beautifully said. And we find that shame, a lot of people that come into work, healing mental health issues, addictions, all of that, shame becomes a big part of their core identity, their identity structure. And so shame is, 99.9% of the time, it's not just one thing. It's an interwoven web of emotions, of stories and narratives that if they had an overarching theme, they would say there's something inherently wrong with me. And so, Ben spoke about, we can have our joy suppressed with shame. We can have our sadness suppressed with shame. We can have fear suppressed with shame and all of these states. And so, someone has put in the comments there, it's a shame's a gateway. It certainly can be. It's a gateway to accessing a lot of those tender spots that we need to access on our healing path that are being covered up by shame. And Ben said it so well. Shame wants to hide. It wants to turn away. It wants no one to see it. But in order
Yeah.
to get past whatever dysfunction is showing up in our lives or the lives of our clients, we have to look at and address those tender spots in a very, very safe and compassionate way. So a couple of
Yeah.
people just asked, sorry, just in the comments, will the slides be available? Just screenshot them as you go. Plus, they'll come up on the replay as well, which is basically a screen recording of what we're going through today.
Yeah, it's worth one quick note on just, what's the impact of shame? I'm sure I don't need to tell you, everyone has shame and it's a pretty gnarly emotion. If you've encountered it before in yourself. And it really drives, it's so painful. It's one of the most painful things you can experience, and that's why it drives a lot of sort of challenging behaviors. A lot of addiction is related to shame, driven by shame. A lot of the inner critic gets really, really strong or emerges from shame, an attempted coping mechanism for shame. All kinds of anxiety and depression. Even people were talking about how it leads to violence or domestic violence, things like that. A lot of sort of pathologies stem from shame, which is another reason why it's so important to work with.
Absolutely. And just a couple of questions in the comments. How does shame show up? You're going to get a very good picture by the end. If not, let me know because we've done a terrible job in this class of explaining it. Another question around how shame can be attached to joy. We're going to give actual examples of that as we move through the slides because that was one of my lived experiences. So we'll definitely go into that. So I'll start sharing my screen now. Just don't look at how many tabs I've got open, everyone. That's a little bit embarrassing. Okay, there we go. I have a tab problem. Okay. So before we start talking about, what we're describing, exploring and deconstructing, we're talking about toxic shame. But it's first worth noting that, there's a healthy version of shame and we need to acknowledge that. There's a reason why we have all of the emotions that we have as human beings. They're very necessary and they have very healthy functions. And shame is no different. So the healthy version of shame is Ben spoke about it being an inhibitor. So it's an inhibitor of our expression in the context of remaining connected to other human beings or our tribe, so to speak. And so, growing up for most of our evolution in hunter-gatherer tribes, alienation from the tribe was considered a fate worse than death. And so we want to stay connected to people. It was good for our survival. It was also good for the survival of the tribe. And so shame is there. Like an example might be, if we're in a tribe and there was some rustling in the bushes and we weren't sure what it was, and all the elders and everyone's telling everyone to be quiet, and I'm running around yelling and dancing, going, hey, everyone, and having a dance, they might give me those death dagger stares and go, stop. Shh. And I might feel, embarrassment, humiliation. I'll go into that shame physiology, which we're going to talk more about in a future slide. And I feel that. And then that is very healthy version of it because it will inhibit my expression in that moment for the betterment of the people around me. And then, ideally after that, I have maybe an elder of the tribe or a motherly figure come up to me, and explain to me why in that particular context, my expression wasn't best. And that, we don't want to shut down your expression in the future because it's a beautiful part of who you are as a human being, but in that context. So this is a healthy way that we can have the emotion of shame without it becoming toxic and an identity. So when shame becomes toxic, it becomes very self-referential. Yeah. Instead of me dancing around when everyone told me to be quiet because there was a possible threat around the corner, it becomes that action was wrong. It becomes now I am wrong as a human being. There's something wrong with me. I'm deficient. Other people have it together and are normal, but I'm not. It becomes very, very much about the self. And then from that day forward, I have that as one of my narratives, and I can have all these other shame narratives going on, which lead to me not wanting to express and wanting to isolate and always having extremely low opinions of myself and having a very harsh inner critic as well. So it's always worth noting there that there are always healthy emotional states, even of these shame, anger, all of these other ones. And so if we're looking at, I guess, a spectrum of the emotional state of shame, we can have shyness, embarrassment, humiliation. These are very, very normal emotional reactions to have as a human being, like I was spoken about if I was dancing around in the tribe. Shyness can be a shame identity. So shyness can turn into an identity structure and can become toxic. But shyness is also very much context dependent. If somebody shows up and I'm doing a talk about this kind of thing, then I might come across as not shy at all and quite confident. But you put me in a different context, like if I go to a talk and they're talking about something that I am not very well versed in, then I will appear very, very shy in that context. And there's a reason for that because I have nothing to really contribute to that group dynamic in that moment. And it's better for me to stay more reserved. So shyness, there's nothing wrong with, except if it becomes chronic. Yeah, so chronic shyness is where it can show up as an identity, and I start to say, "Well, I'm Ryan, and I'm a shy person," and then that veils my reality, no matter what context or social situation that I go into. And so down the bottom there, we have obviously when things start to become toxic, these normal emotional states there then start to become, like I spoke about before, self-referential, in that I start to have self-disgust and at the extreme end, self-hatred, where I just really can't stand what's looking back at me in the mirror. And I know that I've been there in the depths of my drug addiction. I've definitely been in that place, and it's an incredibly heavy place to be.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it's on the topic of toxic shame. What it does is or how it works is we isolate ourselves. When we're feeling that toxic shame is we will withdraw from others, we will sever that connection. And we get into a spiral, a downward spiral here because what it's trying to do is keep us safe. Right. So it anticipates that if I connect to people, they'll see me. They'll see that I'm worthless, that I'm not good enough in some absolute core way. And then they'll reject me and I'll be isolated. And that's terrifying. So we sort of preemptively isolate ourselves. And this is why we get in this tragic situation of where, we want to avoid being isolated, being alone. And so we do it to ourselves. We make ourselves feel isolated and alone. And then it just confirms itself. And then, we isolate ourselves, then look around and go, well, I don't have any friends. Therefore, it must be true that I'm worthless and, not worthy of friendship and so on. And so it reinforces itself over time, which is what makes it so difficult as well.
Yeah, great point. It becomes a loop. The shame confirms itself with evidence that it created in the first place and just keeps kind of circling on itself. And also shame's a big reason why people don't reach out for help as well. If they're in such a shame state and they want to isolate, even reaching out to get the help from the practitioner they need becomes very, very difficult. And that's where real compassionate support, from friends and family members becomes so important in that process.
Yeah. Do we have a moment for a question or two? There's a couple of good ones.
Yeah, do you want to go? I just haven't got the chat box up because I'm sharing, but you go for it, Ben.
Okay, yeah. Does someone else can shame live in the body and cause physical pain? I mean, shame does live in the body, or all emotions live in the body. And it can sometimes, all repressed emotions can be linked to chronic pain. And it's not, they don't sort of cause it directly. It's that the body creates the physical pain as a distraction from the emotion because your body, it feels safer to feel the physical pain and have you worried about that than it does to actually approach the shame because that feels very threatening. Um, and it seems a couple of people definitely resonating with this kind of shame loop idea. And the shame becoming is there a reason shame becomes the identity of the self, or does it just happen? Uh,
I think,
yes, it's essentially. Well, Ryan, you're moving on to that later on, aren't you? You're addressing that.
yeah, I'll explain. We're going to talk about sort of traumatic imprints and how they're stored within the body and the psyche, and I guess that will start to make a little bit more sense. And like I said at the start, it's like shame isn't this one, we don't tend to go through one shameful experience that we don't process and don't have the resources or the attuned person to help us move through and then have a real shame identity. It tends to be an accumulation. And there's an accumulation of these things. And over time, the self, the idea of who we are, starts to become one just polluted with ideas of shame. It just becomes so dominant, that it weighs us down. So, it's like we come into this world with an invisible backpack. And every time we have one of these shameful experiences that we can't process, we put a rock into the backpack. And some rocks are bigger than others, some are heavier than others. But we're not taught as human beings how to properly move through and process these experiences. And our parents weren't taught either. We didn't learn it at school. We're not alone here. Part of what we're doing here today is the part of that education process for the future. But then we move through time and just that backpack gets heavier and heavier and heavier. And then it gets to a point where we can barely get out of bed in the morning and our whole makeup is around the backpack because it dominates our consciousness and what we're experiencing on a day to day and moment to moment basis. And that is shame for a lot of people. And so some of the narratives here of shame, and these are ones that we can explore within ourselves or explore with clients, and some of them we've touched on already, but there's something wrong with me. There's something inherently wrong with me as a human being. I'll never be enough. I'll never be good enough for some sort of standard that our critic has set for us. And a lot of them, Ben, maybe you want to touch on this because I know it's a topic that you know a lot about. It's a lot of the time shame can lead to us trying to be perfect and us having an ideal of perfectionism and then constantly trying to live up to that and not being able to be perfect. Wow.
Yeah,
And then feeling less than even more.
yeah, for sure. So I'll touch on that in a moment. Also, just worth saying that this is the structure of shame. It has on the one hand you have the emotion of shame, and on the other hand you have the an identity that comes with it. So you have the physiological emotion in the body, and then the identity. That's I'm unlovable, I'm a failure, uh, I'm not good enough, and it's helpful to be able to elucidate both sides of this because often we just have the thoughts looping in our head, but we don't actually know where the shame is in our body, right? And then we're not in a position to do much about it. The thoughts are dominating us. Similarly, sometimes we can be overwhelmed with this feeling of shame, but we can't really see what the stories are attached to it. So this is why it's useful to be able to figure these things out. And when it comes to perfectionism, it's a good example because there's always like a shame-based identity we have at the core. So for me, it was in this case, it was something like I'm just fundamentally not good enough, and that comes with a deep feeling of shame, and then you're you take on a sort of a pride-based compensation to attempt to escape the shame. There's a compensatory mechanism. For me, that was perfectionism. This belief comes in, I need to be perfect, um, which is trying to escape, sort of outrun the shame, as it were. And so you end up with this deep shame of I'm not good enough, and then this attempt, I need to be perfect, and that's then running your life. There's this continuous energy of need to be perfect, need to be perfect, need to be perfect. And then you get defensive or can get passive aggressive with people anytime they suggest you've made a mistake or what you've done isn't up to standard or whatever it is. And really it's just this toxic shame running amok, and not knowing, not having the awareness of it, and not having the skills, the resources, the capacity to be able to meet it in the body.
And so we have some other ones here, I'm unlovable. I don't deserve to be happy. I'm a failure. I'm worthless. Um, yeah, that I don't deserve to be happy one. That's where we see a lot of self-sabotage for people. I know I had this one running for many years, and we can have tough times when we're in heavy emotional states, but then all of a sudden, when we start to achieve a level of, happiness in air quotes or success, we have this story based on shame running in the background that says, hey, you don't deserve this. And then in that moment, I would always go and completely sabotage it, and then both yourself and
Yeah.
people around you look at you and go, what are you doing? Things were just starting to go well for you. And you went and blew it all up. And I'm like, I don't know. And, I took a lot of exploration from my point of view to realize that deep down, I didn't think I deserved any good things to happen to me in my life.
Yes, that sabotage I think is a huge one actually. As one of the effects of shame, I think people don't realize how deep self-sabotage can go. We kind of set the limits of our life of how much we can engage with life, how big we can be, how or maybe not how big, how much of ourself we can be. sort of very, very unconsciously. It's this almost invisible limit that you're setting yourself because it feels really unsafe to go beyond that because you might end up in a situation where your shame is triggered, where someone sees you, right? Which feels that is so unsafe. And so, when it comes to trying to improve your life, actually one of the best things you can do rather than getting a business coach. It's like, I don't know what to do. I need a business coach. It's actually, you might have to address some of the shame and those sabotage patterns first or alongside.
I was doing some mentoring with our embodied processing students a couple of years ago, and they would always reach out and go, "Oh, can I get some mentoring? I need some help with, my marketing or writing an article, blah, blah, blah." Without fail, every single session turned into, doing EP around the fear of being seen, which is shame, without fail,
Yeah.
because that's what's underneath it, at the end of the day. And, if we think about that healthy version of shame, if we had no shame, because healthy shame lets us know that we do have limits as a human being. And if we had no shame, then we would pretty quickly head towards narcissism. Okay, so it's healthy to have that bit of shame. As we go into toxic shame, we take those limitations or healthy limitations that we have as a human, and they become just massive. We put every single limitation under the sun on ourselves to the point where anything outside of very narrow parameters become, you don't deserve this. This isn't for something like you. Even happiness, joy, success, whatever it looks like, a healthy relationship, a healthy, friendship, or all of that. And that's when we jump in and sabotage because shame just takes the wheel of that bus and just drives it off a cliff. And we've just got here as well, judgments from the inner critic. And the inner critic is that one that would say, like Ben was saying, you have to do this perfectly. You can't fail. It puts these unrealistic expectations on us. And with these, I guess, statements here or beliefs they are, we can experiment these with ourselves or with clients. We use the analogy of dropping a pebble into a pond and we can have a client sit there. I do it all the time. And, I just get them to close their eyes and they can just say to themselves, there's something wrong with me. And then we pay very much attention to the felt sense of that. Like, how does that statement, how does that belief, how do those words land within my body? And what is my, bodily somatic reaction to that? And, if I might say I'm a failure, and if I don't hold that belief about myself, if that's not true for me, then there won't be much going on. Or my brain might kick up ideas of, well, I succeeded at that thing. So that's not true. I fail at some stuff. I succeed at some stuff. If that's a core belief based on shame, that if I say I'm a failure, it'll feel true. I'll get that sinking feeling of, yeah, that's me. That's me. So that's like a nugget then. And I can go,
Yeah.
okay, that's something to explore now if we are holding that unrealistic belief about ourselves or about the world.
Yeah. And that overpowers even the mind because sometimes we kind of will deny because it feels threatening, we'll deny to ourselves that we're ashamed or humiliated or something like that because it feels threatening. But you can always tell just by turning to the body, it's like, okay, no, you can tell that it's landed. So you feel a bit of that heaviness. The body starts to move in, and you'll notice a lot of denial in the thoughts as well. That's sort of a even if the shame is hidden and invisible, it's like if those thoughts are coming in to try and reassure yourself endlessly, and you feel a bit of that heaviness, tension in the body. That's when it's a sign that there's that shame hidden underneath somewhere.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what we'll do now in this slide, we'll touch on the components of a traumatic imprint, because when we're talking about the real root causes of shame, it's going to come back to these undigested life experiences where we're shamed and weren't able to process it. So what can happen in moments of trauma or what does happen? One of the things to know is trauma is very subjective. What is held as an imprint for one person may or may not be held as an imprint for another person. It's not objective, it's very, very subjective. Now, there are extreme circumstances like sexual abuse, physical abuse, a lot of that, which will be traumatic and held as an imprint for pretty much everybody that experiences it. But there's many other events and things on that spectrum. And I'll do one related to shame that we use in a lot of our classes. A lot of you on this call have probably heard me say this before, but an imprint can be something as innocuous as I'm a kid in grade 2 at school and I'm in class and I want to put my hand up and answer a question and I don't normally do that. It's not normally something I do in a class context, but I feel very confident about what the answer is to this question. So I put my hand up, say the answer, and whatever I say is wrong or silly, or I don't know what I've done, but everybody starts laughing at me, like laughing and pointing. Everyone in the room is looking at me. Extreme embarrassment. comes up in my system. And in that moment, my body goes into a stress state, like with any moment of our life when our nervous system perceives some sort of threat in our environment, be that physical or psychological threat. It'll go into a state of fight, flight, freeze, fawn, whichever it deems. This isn't a class on the nervous system, but a lot of you will get this. It will go into whichever nervous system state it deems is best for survival in that moment. So I probably go into a freeze state in that moment. And I'll automatically, as a human being, look around my environment to try and find some sort of resource, or normally another human being who I feel is on my side and I can connect and attune with. So in that moment, I might look towards my best friends and go, they'll connect with them, but they're laughing the hardest and pointing the hardest and egging everyone else on. I might look to the teacher, the other adult in the room, and they've just turned their back. I'm getting no connection or anything from them. And so what I do, I open up a loop, a threat loop or a trauma loop inside my body, in my system. And in order for that to complete, it needs to be closed, that loop. Once again, we're not taught how to do this or how this works when we're young. And so in that instance, if I leave that classroom and there's nobody else I can speak to at the school, an attuned person who can help me process what happened, and then I go home that night and the home environment isn't a place where I can properly process and have that attuned parent that I can talk to openly, feel safe, hug with, connection, talk about it, process the embarrassment, process the fear, what happens? That loop remains open. When that loop remains open, the overwhelmed nervous system and that emotional energy doesn't fully process and move through our body, and it gets stored. As a result of that, we create painful narratives about ourselves and the world, and these beliefs are generalizing. They completely generalize. So in that instance, I can decide about myself based on shame, which was just embarrassment in the moment, that it's not safe for me to speak up. Okay. Not just it's not safe for me to speak up or to speak up in a certain way or a certain context, but it's not safe for me to speak up. Okay. When that belief is then held and nothing's addressed, we create what's called an orphaned part, which is looking out from that day forward for anything potential or similar happening in our life in order to protect us. So we've now created a protector part as well. So we can fast forward. This is why when people say time heals all wounds, it's absolute garbage when it comes to trauma, because you can fast forward 20 years from that day, and I might need to, something's happening in relationship and I need to express my needs. And I go to knock on the door to speak to my partner to express my needs. What happens? That orphaned part becomes active. And I suck back and I pull away and I won't express my needs because it's not safe for me to speak up. I go into survival reaction. I need to speak to my boss about something at work, similar situation. I go to knock on my boss's door, orphaned part comes up and I suck back. And so now I've got these beliefs, these narratives, these emotions, this dysregulated nervous system around this, all based on one initial reaction, which was based around shame. And now, if you take not just one of those instances, but a couple of dozen, which most people that I've worked with have, then all of a sudden you can see how a shame identity starts to be created. Because now it's just not safe to speak up. It's now, I'm not safe to express joy. I'm not safe to be sad. It's not safe to be angry. And so I just limit and limit and limit my expression to the point where no wonder we isolate, because anything outside of that is isolation, is deemed as a threat to our safety. That makes sense? Hands up,
Yeah.
everyone. Does that make sense? Okay, great. All right, let's now talk about some of the
Okay.
physiology of shame. Ben, would you like to talk about shame? I think a lot of people on the call would know kind of if we said go into a shameful posture. I think can you just everyone go into a shameful posture? Let me see what it looks like. Yeah. Yeah, you can see it's closed down, oftentimes to the right. Some people to the left, but oftentimes to the right. So Ben, do you want to talk about shame posture and how we can maybe start to work with this?
Yeah, I mean, I even just realized now, I mean, I twitch my neck because I have excess bone growing in my neck because I used to have this really forward head posture, which was partly to do with desk work, but I think the origin was partly, shame, like trying to keep safe, like keep a small profile, like sitting at school, right? Of just make myself a little bit smaller, curling over. It's over time as the shame, the rocks in the backpack, as Ryan was putting it, as they start to build up, it really starts to impact your physiology and kind of how you move in the world. Like nowadays, I can see it everywhere. I can almost walk into a room and sort of spot various people just based on how they're, maybe they make way for me. I just walk into a room and some people will just instantly make way. You can almost feel that will be very hesitant in asking for something, as if they're, can you pass me that? But they'll just be very, very almost ashamed of asking. asking for me to pass them something or whatever it might be. This kind of physiological, the way we show up in the world is affected by shame. And I'm talking about this is kind of a day-to-day sense of how just how we move through the world. We sort of we're almost fighting against it because we're having to go through the world and do we have to engage with people and things to earn a living and what have you. But there's this part of us inside us all the time trying to just saying no, let's not let's I'd rather withdraw, I'd rather isolate, and you're kind of constantly pushing against that, and that's where you end up with this slightly shy or timid behavior. For example, it's you're kind of it there it's two steps forward, one step back. When it comes to working with shame, though, I find it very useful to engage the physiology because Ryan was talking about these loops that need to be closed. And the way you close the loop is by fully allowing that part to take on its protective to go to run its protective route, to go along the tracks it was trying to do. So shame wants to help you to hide. And so you want to allow that and fully let this part of you, the shame part, hide. Let it have the opportunity to complete what it came here to do, which is to keep you safe. The only difference is here, unlike in the example Ryan gave, that school kid would have been very unconscious as to what was happening. Ideally, we at this point we're much more conscious, we're much more aware. It's like, okay, there's this part of me here that feels ashamed, and I'm consciously letting myself complete this action of hiding. And as you're doing it, you're keeping your attention in the body so that you're really present with it. So you can just let yourself, oh no, you can feel that heaviness, feel that desire to not be seen, and you can just let yourself, let the head. I won't do it completely so you can hear me, but let the head, avert your gaze, avert your head to one side, and let the body curl up. With some clients, I even encourage them, they want to go on the floor and just sort of curl up in the fetal position or get up, just lie on their knees, or even go into the corner of the room sometimes and sort of just sit there really small, getting very small. And it's if you have the capacity and you can learn and build the skills to be able to sit with that and allow that to complete itself, it doesn't last forever. That's when it starts to transform. If you're able to meet it and fully let it complete, it starts to then just dissipate. And in its place, you then start. There's a little impulse that you'll notice, or often it happens this way. You then start to notice a little impulse wanting to rise up again, and it kind of checking around. Is it safe? Can I come back again? Can I start to be myself? And you might have a few. It might go back and forth a little bit of going into shame and then peaking out again. But you can feel that it starts to transform. In fact, someone just asked, what does shame alchemize into? A few different things. It can into a kind of a sense of humility or authenticity often as well. Because the shame is like you have to be inauthentic. You hide your real self and you present sort of a fake self to the world. So as you metabolize the shame, it can transform into a sense, a bit more openness, a bit more authenticity, a slight sense of more solidity, strength. You're a slightly more firm sense of self. Like I am Ben, and I like coffee, and I don't like walnuts. I don't know. I was thinking of coffee walnut cake for some reason. But what I'm trying to say is just like, you have certain opinions that you don't mind. Sometimes you say, oh, your friends might be, oh, I hated that film. And you really like the film, but you go, oh, yeah, it was rubbish because you feel ashamed of presenting your actual opinion because that will disconnect you from your friends, right? So that sense of self becomes a little bit more solid and you're able to, express your opinions and desires and so on. So that's the importance of the physiology of shame because it really over a long period of time, you'll feel it, you'll see it in your body, in your posture. And if you you want to work with the physiology. You don't want to try too hard to make yourself stand up until you felt into it. So you want to feel into it first, feel the shame, and then afterwards you're coming out and up and seeing how it feels to be more upright and open, chest, perhaps shoulders back, that kind of thing. I find that if you go too quickly into the like, okay, I'm just going to stand up, shoulders back, I'm here, tends to be a bit of a resistance of the shame. It's like I don't want to go there and feel it. I'm just going to try and sort of will my way through it and will my way into speaking in front of all these people. And that can work for a time, but it's the permanent deep transformation you're looking for is in really meeting the felt sense of it in the body and letting it move all the way through.
I hate walnuts too, Ben. You're not alone.
Yeah, goddamn
Um,
walnuts. Just
and I think it's like owning
after all this work. After all this work, I could finally say I hate walnuts on air. I don't actually hate walnuts, but there
That's what
you go.
success means when you can own that.
Yes.
It's being able to step into our uniqueness as a human being and be perfectly okay with that. I think that's what we're all yearning for on a very, very deep level. But it takes working through all of these shame contractions held within the body and the psyche to be able to get to a place where we own we're unique. There's only one of us, and that's perfectly okay. And some people will like me, some people won't like me. That's the reality of being a
Mich auf
human
meinen
being.
Fuß heute. War
And
mal Aua am Fuß.
I just need to do a little mute there. Um, and that's when we can get to a place where it feels like you can just take a giant deep breath at that point, where it's like, oh my God, I can finally let go of trying to judge myself in every single moment, in every interaction that I have with other human beings. And it's extremely freeing. And just on the
Yeah.
physiology, and we're about to move into some inquiry questions of starting to communicate with shame as well. But we always want to take the approach of whenever we head into these more, I guess, uncomfortable or difficult emotional states, the relationship that we've had with those emotional states has been one of adversary, of wanting it to go away. So whether it's shame or it's anger or it's anxiety or it's sadness, we're taught as human beings that as soon as that come up, and it's basic conditioning from when we were kids, to like that needs to go away because I won't be accepted in that. What we're asking you to do, whether it's asking your clients or working with yourself, is let's take a different orientation. Let's work with the shame. Let's explore the shame with compassion and a desire to understand the shame, because then we're kind of on the same team. We're seeing the shame as a part. So we're creating distance. So it's not consumed with our whole being and who we are. So we're creating some space, and we're also now meeting it with compassion and not saying, I wish I wasn't this way, because that further embeds the shame itself by trying to get rid of
Yeah.
the shame,
Yeah.
which is another loop we get stuck in. And just with the physiology, I love what Ben was saying. You can yourself or have clients go completely into the shame posture as much as they want and then slowly come out. And you can also notice the resistances when they come out. They might come out to sort of at the posture they were in before. And as they start to like put the shoulders back and the chin up and expand, they might be able to do that. But then also there might be all these resistances telling them, no, don't go, become small again, become small. I used to do this exercise with clients when I was doing a lot of in-person work, especially men. And I would have them yell at me. I would like to I'd say, just yell at me, and a lot of men wouldn't be able to, or their yell was just, 20% of what it could be. And so then resistance steps in. That's what the resistance in the form of shame steps in and says, no, that's not okay. And then we can explore that and go, well, let's work out why that isn't okay. We had the question about joy, and, I had my joy suppressed pretty early on by my dad. And so whenever I started to be a certain level, show a certain level of joy to people, even if he wasn't there, that voice and that feeling would step in of Ryan, stop showing off. Ryan, stop showing off. And I'd immediately want to suppress and minimize myself. But only by doing that work and going, oh crap, because we don't know that that's mum's voice or dad's voice or teacher's voice or whoever's voice until a lot of the time we do the inquiry, because it sounds like our own voice in here. But oftentimes we have picked it up and we have programmed it, and it sounds like us internally, but it wasn't our voice initially.
Yeah, it's worth noting. You mentioned just really quickly the protector parts. You mentioned resistance. For me, that's synonymous with protector parts. When you start to approach shame, you may notice protector parts coming in, and it can happen in all kinds of ways. I won't go into too much detail here, but think, anxiety, depression, or as you start approaching shame, you might notice yourself getting very angry. There might be anger coming up, and if you look carefully, you can notice the telltale signs, the signs that it's actually coming from shame, and that's where you need to go ultimately.
Yeah, yeah, well said. So yeah, feel free to screenshot this, write it down, whatever's going to be most beneficial for you. But we have some inquiry questions here around shame. We've spoken about how we can really dig deep and find out what shame narratives or beliefs that we have by dropping the pebble in the pond in that earlier slide with some of those beliefs and statements. We've spoken about being able to work with the physiology, and you can do this all at the same time, with yourself and with clients. And then we can start to now relate to these shameful parts of ourselves. And we can do that with these questions. And some of these questions will resonate and bring forth some really key information, maybe about your shame and the origins of it. Other ones, you might inquire into the shame and get nothing, and that's perfectly fine. We're all unique. We all have a different nature and a different disposition. But we have things here like, can I relate to this shame as a part? And that's, can I first and foremost just create a little bit of distance? Because most people
Yeah.
are drowning in shame. It's an identity. They're glued to it. They're stuck in it. There's no space. Hence why it's all like, I am not good enough. I'll never be good enough. I'm a failure. It's very much wrapped up with the self instead of being seen as a part. Can I witness this part? And then eventually, if we can witness this part without trying to swat it away and make it go away, because think about, I use this analogy with anxiety. Anxiety is like a little tug on the shirt, and I imagine it as a child because it's kind of like our inner child essentially doing the tugging on our shirt, trying to alert us that there's potential threat in the environment or the future. And we try and slap away the hand of that child because we don't want to feel the uncomfortable anxiety. But we're now, trying to shut this part up, who's trying to tell us something. And eventually that little kid starts, pulling on our shirt, slapping us around the face. And we get to the point where we're like, oh, I'm just going to take a Valium to make this anxiety go away because we won't see it as a part and we won't communicate with it and we won't befriend it. And it's incredibly important that we do. But it starts with witnessing first before we can even look at having compassion for this part. But as soon as we understand the roots, we understand when we were fiercely rejected by mum or dad from the ages of 5 to 10, and that created the shame. When we can see that younger version of us, we can start to have compassion for it. Because what we tend to see in the moment is me now with all my deficiencies, and everyone else on Instagram's doing great things with their life. And I'm sitting here on my couch, with my hair all over the place. And so we run the risk of not understanding the roots and just looking at ourselves today.
Yeah.
If this part could
Yeah.
speak, what would it say? Once now we're having a communication, with this shame. Like, what does it have to say? What does it believe about you and the world? Is this story the absolute truth? And this is, you can ask this while doing some exercises with yourself or with clients. You can also, this can be a journaling exercise. You can go into that shame posture with the hand and journaling, and you can start to write out some of these questions and just see what comes forth. This is all information on the healing journey. It's not good or bad or right or wrong. It's yours or this person's, it's their experience right now. We have to be very real about what our experience is in this moment in order to move forward. And we have to dig deep. We can't cover it up. Who am I with this part, and then who am I without this part? Is it normally an interesting inquiry question? Sometimes shame is so wrapped up in our identity that people have so much trouble even answering, like, who am I without this part? What if this went away? Would I still exist? If I still existed and this part went away, what would be left? What would be left of me? What images or memories come to mind? You know, I used to get that look. Remember that look your parents would give you? Either one of them or both. For me, it was my dad. There was that look, and I'm like, oh God, it's just shame, immediately that comes to mind. How long has this part been with me? Other clients I worked with would say as long as I can remember. But if we explore a little bit further, oftentimes we can access a time, sometimes even if they were very young, when this shame wasn't wrapped up in their identity. They were more free, expressive. And what does this part need? All of these orphaned parts have unmet needs. There was unmet needs at some point in our life, which became an orphaned part, but the needs are still unmet. And at the end of the day, all adults, we're all just children trying to get our needs met. It's the harsh reality of the situation.
Yeah, there's one good question that is helpful to help people understand how to do this. Alicia asks, is this done for each experience individually or all together? And I would say just remembering the structure of shame, it's got the identity and then the emotion, and then there's also memories attached, right? So a particular event or experience might have, would be a memory, and that will feed into a shame part. But you could have several memories that feed into the same shame part, or they could sometimes feed into sort of separate ones. Like you could have one for I'm weak, and you could have one for I'm worthless, and they might feel a bit different. That you can kind of sense they're separate parts. In which case, you would do these questions for these. Typically, around the identities tends to be where it's most productive. Though you could do it about individual experiences as well, but I'm just trying to give you a bit of a sense of the structure. So you could ask it about an experience, but really it's the part, it's that identity of I'm weak. That's what hits you. That's what you can feel, and so that's the real part there that you could explore. And you might have a few of those shame parts, or it might be just one big, fairly big blob. Might
Yeah,
be
yeah,
one
I've found
core
that we
blob.
can address it as a blob, but also, yeah, individually as well. Because you might have the sort of shame around joy, and then that would be explored sort of individually. Then there might be a shame around sadness, and they're quite different. And you could do it for both, and they can often have different roots and different origins, or they could be very related. This is why it's such a personal exploration.
Yeah. There's also, this is getting a little bit technical, but there's also ones where you've got sort of the core shame, which is that's the rock bottom is I'm weak, right? That's the rock bottom of the layers of trauma. But I spoke at the beginning about when shame hides other things, and that's a little different. So when the rock bottom is you might have a load of anger, right? And then there's shame is a sort of a protector part over that anger. So the shame is protecting you from lashing out with your anger everywhere. And so that might be a slightly more isolated piece of shame specifically to do with anger that you might have to work with in a very specific context.
Yeah, and so we call that in EP, that's a coupling dynamic. And so we've got shame and anger and probably a little bit of fear in there as well. And they're all kind of coupled in together. And so in that process, we would have to uncouple to explore each of them individually.
Yeah.
So we've just sort of broken down some of the steps here, and I'm going to, after this slide, we're going to talk about how we would address, shame in an embodied processing session, and I'll bring up the flow chart. And this is just sort of a bit of a recap, I guess, of what we've spoken about so far. So feel free to, take a screenshot of this or write it down, whichever you like. But the first one we've spoken about is redressing our relationship to up. We want to move away from an adversarial relationship and a go away to one of being more accepting and then moving into a place eventually of compassion, understanding that these are all parts of ourselves. The orientation that we teach all of our practitioners to have with their clients, but also with themselves, is all is welcome here. Okay? All parts of you are welcome here in this moment. And there's a softening that takes place, especially in a practitioner client relationship. When the client has all this shame, they've been wearing a mask, trying to keep themselves hidden in all these situations, to be in a space where the person sitting across from them completely accepts them in their shame and wants to explore it with compassion with them. It helps them stop being ashamed of their shame. So you stop that shame loop going on. Now we're just dealing with shame and not just the ashamed feeling of being shamed. That's saying shame a lot in a row. So meeting it with compassion and a desire to understand it. All of these parts want to be heard and understood. Just like a human being, we all have the deep need to be seen, heard, and understood. So do these different parts of our psyche as well. So let's take that orientation with it as well. Exploring shame postures, we've been over that. Getting to know your personal felt sense of shame or finding that with the client, because any emotional state, we're having a very unique experience. Like there might be themes with anger or themes with sadness, but we need to know exactly what shame feels like for us. Like how I always ask clients, like if they're angry, I'm like, how do you know? How do you know? Where is it in the body? Does it have a shape? Does it have a color? Does it have a density, an intensity? Is it moving? Is it in a solid state? We all have an individual felt sense of all of these states. Inquiring into our shame and its narratives. We've been through that. Relational support and corrective experiences, incredibly important. Ben, do you want to touch on this one first off?
Yeah, sure. So, we spoke about sort of feeling the shame, but Ryan spoke about with a therapist, a practitioner opposite you. That's an example of relational support. There's something incredibly healing about being witnessed in your shame and then still being accepted. I can remember in my own life, it was with a former partner, and I was just crying and crying, and she was just there, and she would just sort of hold me, and then just was still there afterwards and still loving me afterwards. And I was partly crying just because of that experience. Um, was just so healing. Having that shame be seen, that part that you don't want to be seen, and it finally gets seen, and that person is responding with acceptance and love. Goes a really really long way, and corrective experiences as well. This is particularly effective. Once you've felt some of the shame, it's really important to go out into the world, and the nervous system, maybe it's a bit freer now. You've freed up a bit of the shame, and then you start going being yourself in the world. But then if you start getting really positive responses from people to you being more authentic and open in yourself, that really locks in the nervous system. It's like, oh no, I can be myself. It's okay. So having people around you who can see you and who are going to give you as much of that acceptance and love as you can get. I mean, that goes for pretty much anything, but shame in particular, given that it's so specific to relationships. Um,
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And those corrective experiences can just be, if we find out for a client that there's a belief that they're a failure or they fail at everything, then let's give that part contrary evidence to that happening. So in between sessions, pay attention to your successes, the things that you do. Maybe you said, well, I'm going to go to the gym twice this week and you do it. Don't just brush that off. Pay attention to that and show that part, hey, I succeeded at that. Yeah, and so all of a sudden you can start to soften that part a little bit because now it's because, like I said, these beliefs and these narratives they generalize about everything, so we can give corrective experiences in terms of that. And yeah, relational support. I spoke about it before. When you're in the presence of someone else who won't judge you in the states that you're desperate to hide away from people from, that is incredibly therapeutic in of itself. Let alone going and exploring from there. Learning to regulate, oh, sorry, child consciousness work. So inner child work, that's more
Yeah.
to be done, with a practitioner, although there's some things we can do ourselves, but sort of once we might, in the inquiry questions, we might start to locate. It's like, oh, okay, it's this version of me when I was 6. That was when I felt this shame sort of identity start to take hold. And it's like, well, can we now have compassion and meet the needs for that 6-year-old version of us and help them through this as long as it takes?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing quickly on that. I find that's particularly healing t towards the end. If you're in a session exploring shame, you might be, understanding it, trying to meet it, maybe feeling into it, but then that consciousness work can be really powerful at the end to connect to that young part of you that felt all that shame, and to almost provide them, I guess, what you'd call in our language here a corrective experience. It's like, okay, you were in that really difficult situation and you felt that shame. Okay, now, what do you need? What can I give you? Where can I take you to a safe place? Maybe you want to go on the moon with your cuddly toys or something where you're far away and feel a lot safer, or and your cuddly toys are all super loving and accepting of you. I actually had, yeah, one client who had a resource was a cuddly toy, and it was because it's just unconditional love, right? And so just from that perspective, to kind of almost I think of it as cauterizing the wound. Really, you sort of feel that shame, but then you bring in the love at the end, to that inner child.
Yeah, love that. Learning to regulate our nervous system pretty much will help in any area of our life. Understanding some basic skills to regulate our nervous system. The shame is very much, without going into nervous system theory, very much what we call a dorsal vagal or shutdown, collapse, immobilization kind of state. So learning to regulate. We have lots of other classes on that. That's a whole class in of itself. And then obviously processing the traumatic imprint. So the origin of these unprocessed shame events, being able to locate, understand, meet with compassion, and process those. And we might give a little run through here on the next slide of that. So embodied processing is the modality that I teach. Ben's a senior practitioner in there. I can see a whole bunch of EP students and practitioners on the call here. This is a flow chart of how a session runs. So how we would approach shame and a bit of a high level overview kind of thing here is Ben mentioned a resource just before, and his client's resource was a cuddly toy. Resource is something we always do at the start of an EP session to help a client find some sort of safety support or even at the very least neutrality within their body. And there's various ways we can do that. There's 3 options up there. We're up to about 6 now, I think, in the course. And this is a place that we can always bring a client back to. And once we've developed a resource for ourselves, it's a place that we can bring ourselves back to if ever we go dip into too much of an overwhelmed state, when we're exploring a lot of these imprints. What we could do then, we can invite in once we've discussed with the client and realize there's a deep-seated feeling of being a failure, then we can actually invite that in for the client. So we invite that into the body. There'll be a felt sense of I'm a failure, or there'll be a felt sense of I'm not good enough. There'll be a felt sense of I'm not lovable, or any of the narratives that we had earlier. And so we invite that in and we start to explore that once again with the client. We explore that as if we're a team, us, the practitioner, the client, but also the part that we're working with. We're all a team here and we're exploring. We notice where it lands in the body. Are there any images or thoughts associated with it? What are the qualities of it in the body? And we explore. We then find origins. We have many inquiry questions that we can use to start to trace back the roots of where this particular imprint came into play. And, they might, based on those inquiry questions, go, okay, yeah, this takes me back to When my dad told me I lost it at footy or a running race, and he told me, you got to be a winner in this life. And I was all ashamed. And then I'm like, I'm going to be a winner no matter what. And then that's the start of one of these shame-based identities. Then we can go back and work with that. We can work around that memory. We can work around that dynamic and that relationship with dad at that time. And that can involve, I mean, Ben, you could speak to it. It could involve anger. We have to work through the anger at dad that was suppressed in the moment that it wasn't fair. The always needing to be accepted by him and never feeling that way. So hence having feelings of rejections. There's many different ways, an EP session can go, and we can't really predict it, can we?
No, no. I mean, all these things are interwoven with many other things. So it's rare that you just feel shame and there's no other thoughts related to anything else or any other emotions or things attached. So these sessions are very much an exploration. And that's the kind of mindset you take to it as well. It's not like even when you're exploring this, you might have a gentle, open intention to explore shame. It's like I'm curious about shame. I can tell I'm sabotaging myself a lot. I want to explore this shame. But to really find the gold, you need to always kind of stay open and that just let your body lead you where it needs to lead you, as it were. And you're as as Ryan says, you'll find the shame is linked to anger or all sorts of other mechanisms and behaviors and emotions and or fight or flight responses or bracing or freeze, all kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we have, all different processing techniques that we use with people. The common theme that these processing techniques have in common is we're safely moving towards sensation and emotion in the body and helping it work through, as opposed to suppressing it, pushing it away, or trying to throw it at other people. And this is also a key learning because in our day-to-day life, it's always going to help us when we can safely turn towards our emotional states that are going to happen on a day-to-day basis and not accumulate any more of this stuff. Also, I spoke about nervous system states, so helping process any, stifled responses that happened in the moment. I work with many clients where there's a certain situation, let's say a flight response they wanted to have. They wanted to get the hell out of whatever situation they were in, but they weren't able to. And as we're exploring it, I can see, even if we're on Zoom, I can see the legs, the restless leg thing, both of them going. And so we exaggerate that movement. That's a sign of an incomplete flight response. And we can have clients moving as they're working through a lot of these things. We can have a similar thing if we go back to the top of the flow chart and we're inviting in, when we realize our joy has been suppressed, that certain type of expression. We can once again, I'll use the example of myself, which I brought up already. When I've done this type of work, I found out that it was from my dad telling me to stop showing off. And then I had to work through all this anger at dad, like, how dare you, look what you've done to me and all that. And then all of a sudden, as I explore deeper, I see my dad's stifled expression for expressing joy in other emotional states. And then I start to have compassion for my dad and all the previous genealogical line of men. And there's many different things that we have to work through. But at the end of the day, we're unwinding the shame narratives and all the sensations and the emotions attached to a point where we can become a lot more expressive and embrace our uniqueness as a human being. Because I think we all, I think, admire deep down when we see someone who's, oh God, they're just them. They're unique. They're not trying to be someone else. And we admire them deep down, just saying, I wish I could be like that myself. And the truth is, we can, when we start to address our shame and all the underlying stuff here. So that's how we would deal with it in an embodied processing session. And that's going to just about wrap us up. We do, for those of you, I hope you've taken lots of notes and screenshots of all the stuff that we've been through. For those of you that are interested in embodied processing, the modality that we teach, we currently do have a sale on. Before I jump there, I use the all is welcome here. I'm saying before, whenever you're doing this work on yourself or other people, please take that orientation. Always welcome here. And there's nothing to fix. We always have that when we're working with a client. It's like, I'm not here to fix you. You're not broken. The client already believes they're broken, especially if they're coming in with shame. So, we're not trying to reinforce that. We're not a project that needs to be fixed, so to speak, even if it feels that way sometimes. So those of you interested in joining us in the embodied processing training where we talk about shame, anger, guilt, fear, joy, all of the above and teach an actual modality to work with it, we would love to have you in that community. With the emails you've been getting from us, reminders about this, if you have questions about the training, then please just reply to that and I'll personally get back to you. For those interested, that's the URL there, the centerforhealing.com/embodied dash processing. Or just Google embodied processing will come straight up. So if that's for those interested who want to dive deeper into training with us, because that is basically a 100-hour training that we have of certifying people in a somatic modality. So, oh my God, the comments, Ben.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot. I know it's a
Okay,
shame. We really apologize. Couldn't get to all of them. There's some good, great questions in
let me
there.
quickly just go through and have a look at a couple.
Well,
Lots of thank yous.
there's one I liked. There was one about shadow, shame, and shadow. The relationship between shame and shadow. It's worth saying. I mean, the shadow is the stuff that you don't even know is there. So you're unconscious. You might suspect stuff is there. Shadow is like your deepest, most violent sexual sort of stuff is like typically in the shadow. It's a good example of really shadowed material, right? That aren't even you would if someone else said, "Oh, you have this within you," you'd be like, "Nah, get out of here. What are you talking about?" And shame can hide and push things into the shadow. So very strong shame would push things into the shadow. Are
Absolutely.
there times when you'd do regulation prior to exploring the postures? Yes, you would very often, almost always, we start sessions by resourcing, so grounding people, helping them to just get present and regulated in the body, and then you start to explore material from there. That's like the base camp from where you go out into different explorations.
That's right. It's like we talk about, Peter Levine calls it like an island of safety. And so then as we're exploring a lot of these difficult circumstances in our body emotionally and in our life and in our past, if things get too much, we can come back from the island of activation to the island of safety. And then when we feel resourced enough, we can venture back out and explore that island. And as we do that, in a safe way, we grow in our capacity to be with our experience, our internal experience. And that's one of the things we teach in EP. It's like we come into this type of work, it's like a set of scales. We have a very low capacity because we haven't been taught how to deal with circumstances in our life and memories of our past. And we have an incredible amount of stored stress held in the body and the psyche. It's like a heavy backpack. And so, as a time doing this work, we're addressing a lot of the heavy stored stress in the body and ideally coming lighter. But at the same time, we're growing in our capacity to be with experience, internal experience. And then over time, as we get to a certain point where those scales tip, it means that in our day-to-day life, and this is how you know transformation is taking place, it's like I had an argument with my partner, a discussion with my boss, or someone cut me off in traffic, and 6 months ago I would have absolutely lost my shit or wanted to hide. Now I was fine. I was able to deal with the situation. I had the capacity to do it, and I don't feel like I'm carrying anything from that experience, which is a great sign of change and transformation. Um, it's a question here. UCP points. So training offers CPD points, so continued professional development, and all that. Ben, why don't you let people know give a little taster for your class tomorrow? First of all, what time is it?
It's well, you say tomorrow. I mean, it's a bit difficult for me to say tomorrow. It's Thursday morning at 8 a.m. UK time, and
It's
it's
a
called
day and a half away.
how day and a half away. It's called How to Actually Feel Your Feelings. And so the idea is this, that I find that a lot of the cliche stuff about how to feel your feelings is a bit vague. It's like just let it be, just allow. But as we've seen here, just allow shame. It's like, well, it's hiding and there are loads of protector parts and it's linked to all sorts of other stuff. It's more difficult than just let it be and allow. So I try in the thing my workshop on Thursday, going to give very specific sort of granular detail of how do you really feel a feeling, like to properly process it and integrate it. Like where do you put your attention exactly? What are the pillars of that?
I love that. And you will get reminder emails, okay, about it. So do 24 hours before, 1 hour before, and at the time of starting. So just keep an eye on the emails and jump on that. And we will be uploading the replays as we move through them as well. God, I'm seeing there's so many questions. Please reply to the emails that you got from us saying that the call's about to go live with your question, and I'll make sure I jump in there and answer all the questions. But I want to respect Ben being the middle of the night for you. And we'll end it there. So I want to say a massive thank you to everybody joining us live on the call. I was keeping an eye on it. We had nearly 200 people, and it pretty much stayed that up until about 3 minutes ago. So I want to say thank you for joining us. I hope you're able to take away value both to incorporate into your own life, and if you're seeing clients, bring into sessions as well. And yeah, reply to the emails with any questions. Great to see you all, and we'll see you tomorrow or the day after for Ben's one, and then myself and Matt will be back for the anger one the day after that. So thank you everyone, and thank you Ben, and we'll speak to you all soon.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Bye.